Gunfights were, at this time, were like kind of like a regular occurrence, you know? Usually you'd hear it, you just duck and cover, protect your beer, you know? And then you'd get up and you move on. But on this day, these gunshots were heard by a man named Robert Thompson. You see, he was hanging out in a saloon near the main Coronel building. Now, I guess Robert was like a very popular person in town, and he decided on this day he was not going to duck and cover when he heard those gunshots. He was going to confront whoever was causing this trouble. He walked over to the Coronel building, stood in the doorway, and cocked his gun. I don't know what kind of gun he had, but I imagine the drama. Nearby police officers were warning him to stop and to put his gun down. But Robert, he didn't listen. Many believe he had been drinking. He started blindly shooting into the dark room, trying to hit anyone he saw. He didn't even bother asking, like, hey, who's in this room? All he knew was that it was filled with Chinese Americans. So one man who was inside the building, he just watched the whole thing go down, and he saw people getting shot left and right, all around him. He's like, oh, crap, you know? So he decides to defend himself, and he shoots back at Robert. Eventually, this man shoots him, and Robert went down hard. Not long after he was shot, around 7:30 p.m., Robert died. At this time, it was normal for there to be, you know, the gang gunfights happening and even deaths between gang members. But what made this situation different was that Robert, the man who was killed, he was white. And everyone knew the second that this white man hit the ground, things were about to get bad. Now, to the outside world who had no idea what was going on, it looked like a Chinese man just shot and killed a white man for no reason. So they were already angry. The media is telling the people, like, they're awful, the Chinese immigrants are awful, blah, blah, blah. So everyone's worked up, and now they're like, what? They shot this man? So a crowd, you know, they show up and they started to gather around Robert's dead body. People were freaking out. And word started to spread throughout Los Angeles within minutes. Chinese immigrants were murdering white people. Within the hour, over 500 people gathered around the Coronel building, which might not sound like a lot, but it was literally 10% of the population of Los Angeles at the time. So people are showing up. Some people started lighting things on fire and then throwing them at Chinese people. Anytime a Chinese person was hit, people started cheering. And it wasn't just like, you know, a small group of people cheering. This was hundreds of people cheering at this time. Now, by this point, when like everyone had showed up and whatnot, the people who had originally started the gunfight in the beginning, they were long gone. They slipped away before the chaos started. So this had like nothing to do with killing the people who had actually started it. It had now turned into just a freaking hate crime, really. It was just pure racist psychos wanting an excuse to kill everyone. So then people started to climb on top of the Coronel building, and when they were up there, they were punching holes in the roof, and then they would stick their guns in there and just like start shooting. So they're shooting, and to them it was kind of like they were shooting fish in a barrel. Some of the people inside the building tried to make a break for it, but if they made it outside, then they would be confronted by hundreds of people who had knives, guns, hatchets, you name it, they were ready to murder, okay? Now, many of the angry crowd members weren't satisfied with a quick death. They started to grab any Chinese person they saw, put nooses around their necks, and drag them to a place called Tomlinson Corral. This was a place where there were several hanging posts. Mobsters were actually known to lynch people there. Lynching is essentially the act of killing someone by hanging without a legal trial. In the past, when local authorities used hanging as a form of punishment, people would be sentenced to public execution in Tomlinson Corral. Within minutes, several of the Chinese people who were captured began to be tortured in front of a cheering mob. One of those people was a man named Dr. Chi Long Tong. Dr. Tong was a very successful doctor who worked in the area where the violence was breaking out. Now, he was beloved by so many communities, not just the Chinese community. He was one of the only doctors in the area who was trained in herbal medicine, which was like a very valuable skill in Los Angeles at this time. It's been said that the mob knew how beloved Dr. Tong was, which is why they targeted him. He was captured by a violent crowd member and immediately had a noose wrapped around his neck. He was pleading with his life, saying he could offer his captors gold, silver, anything if they let him go. They checked his pockets and they didn't find anything, so they assumed that he was just a liar. He told them that he had money back in his office, but they didn't care. This wasn't about money for them. They wanted to kill him because he was Chinese. So the captors took a gun, shoved it in Dr. Tong's mouth, and shot him. Oh my God. I think kind of the worst part, well, this is all really bad, but if you're gonna shoot him in the mouth, you would hope that he would die, but he didn't die. So he survived the initial shot. So the captors, they decided to take him to the corral where he was then hanged. Poor guy. Not long after the hanging, someone had noticed that he had on a diamond wedding ring. So they took a knife and literally cut off his finger so they could steal it. Dr. Tong was hanged in the corral alongside 4 other Chinese people. One was a teenage boy. The rest were innocent workers in Old Chinatown who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Another man who was hanged actually lived with Dr. Tong and his family. The mob dragged him out of Dr. Tong's house, brought him to the Tomlinson Corral, and put a noose around his neck. So rather than push him off the platform to die, they instead tortured him. They were taking the rope and pulling him up and down, basically bouncing him by the rope so they could crush his skull against the top of the wooden hanging post. Eventually, he died. If the mob was mad that someone wasn't dying fast enough while hanging on the noose, they would climb up to the top of the hanging post and jump up and down on the person's shoulders until their neck was totally broken. These people are just fucking psychotic, okay? Other people are hanged in different parts of town, like a place called Goler's Wagon Shop. Near the shop, a large wagon had flipped over during all the chaos. The mob hanged 2 people by the wheels of the wagon because they didn't want to make their way all the way down to the corral. Regardless of where they were, each person who was captured experienced a different kind of torture. Sometimes, after some of the men were hanged, they might be strong enough to reach up, slip their fingers under the noose, and actually stop the hanging. The mob would then reach up and crush their hands so they would have to let go of the rope, then leading to their death. Look, there were some good people trying to protect the Chinese community during this time. There was a businessman named William Slaney. He owned a boot and shoe store. On the night of the massacre, he packed his store with people from Old Chinatown and locked them in so he could protect them from the violence outside. Another person who tried to help was a man named William H. Gray, who was actually a justice of the peace. Now, he happened to be at a local vineyard about a mile out of town. People fleeing Old Chinatown ran over a mile in the dark to this vineyard, just praying whoever was there would take mercy on them. Thankfully, William did, and he took in several men and women, hid them in the cellars of the vineyard. Now, while all this is happening, it's, mind you, the world is ending. At this point, it feels like everything is on fire. People, crowds, everyone's angry. It's psychotic. Well, it got worse because bigger crowds arrived to watch the show. And it wasn't just people from like local communities. People that showed up were actually like from the government, wealthy people, Los Angeles police officers. They all joined in. Some of the police officers would stand guard in front of homes, not because, they cared about protecting the people inside, but because they knew that these houses had a lot of valuables or money in them. And that's what's important. Some believe they wanted to take these items for themselves. In one instance, while the police were guarding a house, they literally watched an innocent Chinese man get snatched and dragged to the gallows to be hanged. They were like, "Those Fabergé eggs are still inside, right? Okay, great." While some people in the mob were focused on hanging as many Chinese people as they could, mobs started to spread throughout the local businesses. Rumor has it, one of the Chinese gangs had a huge stash of cash hidden somewhere in town. So now it was turning into like searching for treasure, a treasure hunt. So these assholes just started robbing every business they saw. Over the course of this night, It's believed that somewhere between $30,000 and $70,000 was stolen by the mob. Now, may not sound like a lot. It does sound like a lot, but in today's money, that would be between $700,000 and $1.8 million. So these people, like, they did well, you know? I mean, it was really like a free-for-all. And then finally, at around 9:30 p.m., Sheriff James Burns called an end to the massacre. Well, no one else was doing it, so Sheriff Burns asked a group of 25 onlookers to join the mob and stop them. Thankfully, they were able to break it up. So they essentially pretended to be mobsters, and they were able to stop people from doing more damage. Well, thankfully, this really did actually slow everything down, and it really kind of made everything come to a halt. And by 11 p.m., it was all over. Some people who participated in the murders headed to local saloons and bars to celebrate. There was a report that said one man who was part of a violent mob announced to the bar, covered in blood, quote, "Well, I'm satisfied now," end quote. The next day, on October 25th, the bodies of 17 victims of the lynchings were laid out in front of the jail. An 18th victim, who was the first man to be hanged the night before, had already, by this point, been buried. Some of the local LA newspapers ran their typical headlines about the Chinese, blaming them for the violence that took place. They described it as a glorious night filled with justice. But there were some other local papers that did the opposite. Some papers ran articles calling the entire massacre an embarrassment to the city of Los Angeles. One paper read, quote, "Night of Horrors," with a list of the names of those who were killed. Horrors. It's so hard, huh? But the massacre was so much bigger than Los Angeles. The news of what had happened spread across the whole country. It was even on the front page of the New York Times. Most people believed LA was full of lawless men that were out to steal everything they could. And to them, many of those lawless men were Chinese immigrants. So they're thinking like, yeah, of course this happened. They're losers over there in California.